How do you feel knowing that a lot of this work you introduced to so many advertising spaces, media spaces, this work is ahead of its time? Like, not new,
Yeah.
but new to your vision to gather, put it in that paper, and then put it in this book,
Yeah.
a Bible, a template. Like, how do you feel being sort of ahead of your time? Do you feel yourself that way?
Yeah, I think this came up in another episode. You went to an HBCU. I went to two HBCUs, South Carolina State.
We're AUC. We have AUC in Gunman, right? Morehouse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, you have to know your why. It's funny. Sometimes people will ask me about the book, and they're probably, 10 to 15 years younger. And I ask them, have you heard of Total Market or Cross-Cultural? Well, that's my contribution to the industry, right? And for me, it's about leaving something behind so it helps accelerate the continuum. And if you don't have that, it's one thing to ask for change, is another thing to define what is it that you're asking for to change. And then providing with a framework for how to get from point A to point Z. And I feel like generationally, we are of the same ilk in terms of millennials and Gen Z and Gen X. We're Gen X, and I like to say we're first, second generation post-civil rights. And so for me, it was always about our generation designing a new playbook, a more modern, taking the baton from the civil rights generation and modernizing it, right?
The big question: how quickly can brands and businesses change and modernize in response to the changing demographics globally? The future of work, demand for modernizing the practice of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and industry corrections. This is why we started the Change Podcast by Reframe, to help people leaders like you get answers that accelerate inclusive change and growth that reflects where the world is going. Get ready as we host a discussion with people leaders faced with the same challenges and modernize their approach to solving a decades-old problem. I'm your host, Jeffrey L. Bowman.
Episode 4, it's official. There is a new majority. This was the opening soundbite for a panel my next guest produced with Soledad O'Brien as the host. In this episode, I get to engage with the Patrick L. Riley, a seasoned senior producer and content creator. We discuss the journey of creating the Ogilvy Cross-Cultural Report Roundtable with host Soledad O'Brien. The conversation delves into the pre-production, production, and post-production phases of storytelling. This episode is about the making of the video roundtable while I was at Ogilvy and how it set the foundation for my book and business. In conversation, Patrick and I talk about the new majority impact across various industries. We also discuss the evolution of corporate America, the challenges, and the changes in diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. Our dialogue is about optimism for the future while reflecting on the changing demographics and cultural landscape. Join me. I'm excited to dig in and introduce you to the Patrick L. Riley. For those who have listened to the initial episode of the Change Podcast, Season 1 is about the making of Reframe the Marketplace. It's a book published in 2015. This year marks 10 years since the book was actually published. And we go all the way back to the beginning of 2013 in terms of why the book, the need for the book, and the purpose of the book. We wanted to invite Patrick L. Riley to this episode because Patrick was really instrumental in actualizing an event. It was a follow-up to a white paper that I published while at Ogilvy called the Cross-Cultural Report. A producer, Sidra Smith, and myself were sitting around and thinking about, like, how could we bring this to life? Who were some of the partners that we would want to bring in to the ultimate plan? And the vision for this production was think about a news, meet the press style format where you have key thought leaders talking about the new majority and what impact was it going to have on the marketplace. We wanted to invite Patrick here because decades of impact that he's had in his profession. I'm not going to give his bio. Patrick, for our audience, can you tell us a bit about you, your background, and how did you become who you are today?
Sure. Well, Jeffrey Bowman, I'm honored to be here to reflect on the Reframe movement.
Thank you.
That you were able to extend an invitation to me as a content creator, producer, to help you shape some of the early programming around the launch of the book, all that was involved. Just, I don't know if you remember, as a footnote, I was at the Ogilvy event that you threw, which sort of predates then all of the work you put into this book project. You found me at the end of probably what was a career-defining moment for me as a TV producer. I'd been working as a senior level field producer for the Oprah Winfrey Show since 1998. The show wrapped in 2012, and I continued to do and contribute as a producer to Oprah, Where Are They Now? But as a freelancer and an independent, you were an example of someone who showed me where my skill set could live.
Yes.
And this was an opportunity to shape a program led by Soledad O'Brien.
I think when you and I met, there were foundational pieces that some people call it proof of concept. I think we had written the white paper, the Cross-Cultural Report, creative partner, producing partner, Sidra Smith, and I sat down and we were thinking about putting something that was like Meet the Press. There was a little bit of pushback in terms of it being too serious, right? Is this the tone that we wanted to set? We had to go through the idea of producing the vision. And so we bring you in because of your experience that you had. For a lot of folks who may not be familiar with producing at the level that you produce, there's a process that you have to go through. We're bringing in you and Sidra and a whole crew. What was really meaningful is get the talent selection right. Before you hire the talent, you have to write a script. You have to put together a production book, right?
And you want that talent to represent the messaging, right?
Absolutely.
The diversity in your messaging.
Right.
Yeah.
Before we even get to the actual execution, there's a pre-production phase. Again, this whole season is about the making of, Reframe the marketplace, the total market approach to the new majority. And so what we're trying to do is give people a behind the scenes of what was happening before the book. What were some of the things that actually took place, like revisionist history, right? Can you just talk to the audience during the pre-production phase, when you first heard the idea, what came to your mind? And then, how do you begin to bring that together before production even starts?
Well, you and Sidra reached out to me to participate in sort of helping to bring this vision to life, this idea, as you say, Meet the Press concept. So for us, it meant digging deep as researchers into the material. So I can't remember, but that information was provided for us to look at and see who would be best. Well, firstly, not who would be best, what would be best to break out in that discussion. As a producer, one of the big things that we have to do is sort of take the information that was your manifesto and make a determination on how we format a show concept. What is the discussion and the conversation, and who's delivering the conversations? And then you sort of handed me a rubric that I could fill in.
Listen to you. Frontline. What's a frontline?
Well,
we want to bring it in for the listeners.
you're an executive producer, right? You're the boss, the man with the vision. And so it's important that you communicate to your hiring producer what your vision is, maybe who you already have in mind from your Rolodex. Because let's be honest, I've booked things from scratch where you have to go and find the people. But Jeffrey, you got the Rolodex of life. Can we just tell the people that?
Yes.
So through that concept, sort of through determining we wanted diversity, determining that it would be good to have a Black woman media voice lead that conversation. What other executives in the advertising world, in the media world, would be a good fit to reflect this conversation and to paint the differences between the multicultural marketing architecture that you're kind of presenting.
Yeah, we like to say cross-cultural here.
Cross-cultural,
yes.
And also, but can we talk about that?
Yes, let's dive in.
What you brought to the table at this early phase was helping us understand this new vocabulary.
Yeah.
This was new language. I think in my world, just as a queer defined professional, often we're left to stay up on the glossary of our pronouns.
Yes.
And the new information. So talk about it.
Cross-cultural. Yeah. And I think when we started talking, we went through, the taxonomy, the stages of culture. And I think it was important when we were looking at the script, when we were thinking about casting, right, talent-wise, because we had Carlos Gutierrez. He was
vice chair, Citigroup.
Yeah, but he was former Secretary of State, right?
Yeah, well, of course.
That's, but I think that was important because he had Soledad O'Brien, right? Leading it, Laurel Richie, she was president of the WNBA. Rinku Sen.
And can we just sort of take a moment on Laurel? Just yet again, it was cutting edge. Whoopi Goldberg just announced a network that she'll be running that's dedicated to women's sport. How forward thinking was it to have Laurel?
Yeah, no, Laurel, she's a good friend. They were heavyweights. You had diversity of panelists. You had Afro-Cuban, Puerto Rican. And Laurel, African-American. Rinku Sen, I think she was South Asian. And then he was Asian. Any story you can reflect on?
We spent a lot of time dummying down, if you will, some of the concepts to make sure what we were going to record, it was a conversation. Yep, we built stats. We provided a lot of the information that would be considered the meat. We also structured that to be a conversation and to answer key questions that could get people who were going to be new to this concept. And we worked with you on that. I mean, I think often Sidra and I did a lot of powwowing amongst ourselves to get things right that we could then, and more so she would present to you.
Yeah.
It was a great process. What do they say? In the theater, they say, if it's not on the page, it's not on the stage. Well, Jeffrey Bowman, you put it on the page. So once we established what a format was going to be, it was just a matter of us doing that work to plug that in, to make it something that by the time we were ready to press record, we were ready to go. And that, of course, we can talk about it. That includes set design.
Before we jump into that, I think you hit on a point that I think whether you may have not known, going through the process on the script helped me or make my language more accessible. And so I think that was a great exercise, because when you look at the folks that were on the stage, you look at the leader of it being Soledad, she was the conductor. And I think for her to be able to jump right in. And I think the other part that came out during the process was the passion. Like, I think each of the panelists took the topic personal.
Yes.
And I think that gets into, when you are looking at talent and partnership, the more it closely relates to them, the richer the conversations are going to be. And so I've found that the conversations were richer because it was something that they could relate to.
Well, can you speak, the timing of Soledad being a part of our project kind of reflected maybe a little bit of what was going on in her own career. Yeah. She had embraced African-American
Black in America
coverages and was really doing really great work in that space. She was identifying her own independence herself in the game. Yeah. To your point, relationship building. Yeah. I think a lot of what made the process pleasant that we were bringing to the marketplace was the fact that there were existing relationships that I had with Soledad, because I had produced her before for Oprah, but also we were members of the National Association of Black Journalists in Commons. So we often saw each other in these spaces. It brought what Sidra pointed out to me, a trust.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Once we sort of put all of those pieces together, Sidra handled Carlos in a way, because again, I think there was a dynamic there that made it good for her to sort of manage him. But I had a really good time prepping, but it wasn't necessarily. It was certainly rooted in well prepared material, well vetted material that you, Sidra, and I worked on to be able to then present and brief them accordingly. Yeah. And so that trust comes from you because you hired well, but then it also comes from those relationships we're bringing to the table, making then our process that much more dynamic.
Yeah, no, that's important.
I think that,
yeah, that's important. So let's shift gears a little bit in terms of from the pre-production to the production part. I've seen you on set. You're no joke. There's order. There's not a lot of chaos. Can you talk about the experience of that day? We've now, seen the film in itself.
Yeah.
Early morning, lots of people running.
Early call times.
Can you just talk a little bit about that and what that was like?
Well, logistics. You, the day starts early. Sidra's always able to get a lot of good people in the mix to support us. We called in a lot of good favors because we wanted to have the day of production have the support productions need. You need to be able to have runners to go get the coffee and to grab catering and to manage what that looks like. We need to designate space in our production facility for holding, green room, where will we brief? We need to have clarity on all of the ground transportation that's going to get our subjects from, well, not only to town, but also from then their hotels and or their homes to location. We build out a timeline. So in addition to that early call, everything on that early call, line by line, accounts for every minute of the day up to when we have dedicated our time to start take. I feel like now you say revisionist history, then I'm going to revise. I think we started 10 minutes ahead of time.
What?
I'm remembering Sidra come up to me and said, "Boy, you are good." Because we were on time, hitting all the marks. And I think, and to the point where we were kind of like, I think we're done. So, I mean, we did some cutaways and some pickups by the time the conversation was done, but everything was based on a well-planned layout.
The production
for the day. Yeah. And it takes a village. Yeah. And that's in any aspect of this industry that I've worked in. I learned it best from Oprah, where Oprah paid for the headaches. Yeah. So we always had a lot of people on hand who were being compensated accordingly. Yes, you paid. Yes, he paid, ladies and gentlemen, but we did call in favors to be able to staff out our day in a way where this was a grade A production.
Yeah, and it showed.
Putting on, and it showed. And now that I've sort of played it back, it still shows. It holds up.
It holds up. And let's touch on that because, I think the writing was fabulous. And what do I mean by that? We lost an ancestor, Quincy Jones. And, I'm looking at some of the things, again, very similar to what we're talking about right now. Like you revisit and you remember, he talks about, how Michael didn't want the strings at the beginning for Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. And now
That's right.
it's like when that drops, you immediately...
It's a signature. We all respond to the string
and
before we even get to the cowbell.
And the thing with this is that the line that Soledad opens up with, "It's official." I mean, that to me is like a flag has been planted or was planted.
Well, may I tell you something I've learned in my style of writing, urgency?
Yes.
So I wrote it urgently, that script, because my thought is always, if it's too much, then you can dial it back. But I've always, and think about Oprah over the years. I've scripted a lot of that production over the years, the taped pieces, the heartfelt human interest. I've even searched for dead and decomposing bodies in New Orleans in the wake of Katrina. I got a call from Chicago on 9/12/2001. I thought Harpo, my client, was calling to check on me. They were calling to dispatch me to ground zero. They had the commissioner meeting me so I could get we were the first crew to go kind of into the destruction and see really what that damage was with our hard hats and all that looks like. And then I had to translate all of that into scripting, into a story. So I used a lot of my Oprah tricks on your
that was
script.
effective, because when you now look at that and hear that, there is a sense of urgency. And as you go around to the different panelists, a lot of what was talked about that day still stands and holds today.
It's holding today. It's holding on, because there's just so much that's pulling away at that well-established intel that you really brought to the marketplace. And it's true, it's effective, and yet there are many people who would prefer the world not be approached through that prism.
It's the new majority. And I think it was a recognition, again, that I could not articulate like you could, right? And it's a different medium, right? In the book, it talks about the macro, the new majority. But then when you have someone established like her and yourself, you like it lands differently, right? In the medium. It's audio, it's visual. She has her signature style. And as you go through each of the different panelists and they talk about the impact that is going to happen in the world at that particular time, and as you've listened and reviewed it, has it changed?
When I look at each of these players on that panel, I have seen each of their industries show up differently, and I've seen things in the business. The only reason there's resistance against DEI is because so many DEI officers were established and hired. Now, obviously, there are new thoughts on that, and there's some people who would love to do away with that as a philosophy, but so much of that showed up in a way where, as those kinds of things, when you read the trade on LinkedIn and you see who's hiring and what kind of roles, those are some of the roles because of you that I'd look at myself, okay, that feels like a lot of what we were introducing. And so to that end, yes, there has been change. There's also resistance.
And I'll say within the book, Reframe the Marketplace, when we talk about the total market approach, it's a vertical to inclusive experiences. And I think, when you look at that day in terms of the overall production and what everyone contributed, for me, probably the most impactful piece was that opening, right? And that set the pace for Carlos Gutierrez, Laurel Richie, Rinku Sen, Jeff Yang. And that was a memorable moment for me because you took this macro event, you have this approach to have change and drive impact, and now you have people that are sharing their thoughts that's aligned. That to me was like right?
It was a big deal. And think about it. These are people who are often booked for all types of industry panels. Their expertise looms large. My memory.
What was your takeaway at the best day?
My memory is that everybody was so lifted. It reminds me a lot of the panels. That moment, I keep bringing up NABJ, but the Black Journalist Organization, because, and also Unity, which a lot of work we've done within Unity, which is the collective journalism organization that includes the Black journalists, the Native American, the Asian American, and the Hispanic journalists. The way that those kinds of panels become kind of kumbaya moments, because it's everyone speaking from their different corners of the industry, but they're coming together to realize that they're not alone in their efforts to be inclusive, in their efforts to get the messaging out, that there is an approach that is more inclusive, that came out of just these very well-established people on the subject, but just in that conversation, the fact that we brought them together, that's, and I felt it at the end. And though I knew Soledad well before, I feel like she warmed more to me in the wake of this work than anything else I'd ever done. Oprah, Rachel Ray. This was the piece that sort of had her saying hi Patrick at the dinner party, or hi Patrick it was this one.
I liked that segue into like the post-production. We had an amazing day, and then you have a wrap, right? What did you take away as you walked away from that day? Because, the story thread could have gone in several ways, but I think we were able to piece it together. Were you involved in terms of the post-production?
I definitely did some of the, I looked at cuts, cuts. And offered notes. So I did about 2 rounds of sending notes back. And also something that I do as when I am soup to nuts on a project, I look at that original plan and sort of how, because in post-production, things are a little different than
it's
going
to be changed on the production. Day of production is always going to be changed.
There are always going to be changes. But I loved how it was very similar, meaning the plan was so tight that what the post-production ended up being was still solid.
Right.
It was still kind of in line with what the plan was. It was, can this work? And in post-production terms, it was working. And, you tweak things here, there. You have to do pull-ups. You have to, sometimes some responses go long.
Now, what are pull-ups for our audience? Pull-ups mean what to our audience?
Pull-ups for the audience. You have to sort of go into those long responses and edit them down.
Gotcha.
For time. Yeah. And it's usually it's just for, if nothing else, it's just for time, keeping the conversation sort of equitable in all the beats, having,
there's a cadence.
There's a cadence.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it, Quincy. There's a cadence.
There's a cadence.
Absolutely.
There's a cadence. And on the post-production side, for me, I like to watch the whole thing, right?
Yeah. And watch it raw.
And then begin to kind of build the cadence, the syncopation, trying to find, again, it's official. It's like a boof. It's like the violins from Michael's Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. And to me, that it's like the race you start, and throughout. And I think,
and those are the rubrics, right? The bookends.
Yes.
That a strong start.
Yeah.
Strong finish. And then what are the beats we're hitting in the middle? And so that's what the post-production, that's what the finished piece was. What we did the work on was what kind of fell into each of those beats.
Yeah, love it. Before we wrap up, I think it's important to, give appreciation to the entire crew that day. The set design, the vision was like a Meet the Press, and they were able to kind of bring it together visually, and it felt, and then, the 3 camera, I can't remember the day, how many cameras we had, but you have different angles.
I want to say it was, I feel like it was 4 cameras.
4 cameras.
Yeah.
No, and that's the favorite part, right?
But also, I was going to say, to the punch of what we're talking about, to that well-organized editorial structure. How you know you're getting it because her reads on those intros,
Flawless.
the stuff that's in the teleprompter was read well. It was written well, and it was read well. And we knew, I remember as we were kind of crunching numbers and Sid's like, well, do you think we need a teleprompter? I said, we have to have it. That's the polish you need. Not to say that Soledad couldn't have handled it, but those are the pieces that kind of give you tape that holds up 10 years later.
Right. Well, Patrick, like I said, it's always an honor to work with you and to be able to like revisit. I think it's something that, in one of the other episodes, we talk about the making of the book, Reframe the Marketplace. Audiobooks, they were a thing, but, only certain books. Now, I think what we were able to do was encapsulate the macro event and why this work was needed. And so I think you, Sidra, as well as the rest of the crew, in terms of bringing all this together.
May I ask you a question?
Absolutely,
before we
go for it.
How do you feel knowing that a lot of this work you introduced to so many advertising spaces, media spaces, this work is ahead of its time? Like, not new, but new to your vision to gather, put it in that paper and then put it in this book, a Bible, a template. Like, how do you feel being sort of ahead of your time? Do you feel yourself that way?
Yeah, I think this came up in another episode. You went to an HBCU. I went to two HBCUs, South Carolina State.
We're AUC. We have AUC in common, right? Morehouse.
Yeah. I think for me, you have to know your why. It's funny. Sometimes people will ask me about the book, and they're probably, 10 to 15 years younger. And I ask them, have you heard of Total Market or Cross-Cultural? Well, that's my contribution to the industry, right? And for me, it's about leaving something behind so it helps accelerate the continuum. And if you don't have that, it's one thing to ask for change, is another thing to like define what is it that you're asking for to change, and then providing with a framework for how to get from point A to point Z. And I feel like generationally, we are of the same ilk in terms of millennials and Gen Z and Gen X. We're Gen X, and I like to say we're first, second generation post-civil rights. And so for me, it was always about our generation designing a new playbook, a more modern, taking the baton from the civil rights generation and modernizing it, right? Initially you said multicultural. Now we have language to say cross and polycultural. Didn't exist,
right?
Prior to the work that.
And you had all the diagrams, folks. Look, I know better. I've read all the diagrams. I know.
But no, it's so easy, right? And it's funny because I'll have friends that, man, I heard Tyler Perry say cross-cultural in terms of his movies. That's amazing, right?
Yeah.
Because, if we have this new framework, new playbook, then we all rise, right?
That's it.
And
being the change you wish to see in the world.
And that's why you document.
An exemplar of that.
You document,
yes,
and you make moving films about what you have the foresight about. And if it's commercially successful, great. But at the end of the day, I think everyone wants
it's documented. It's
you want to make impact. There's the commercial success and there's the impact, and sometimes they both can be achieved. But now we're writing a second book, the work that we've done in modernizing diversity, equity, inclusion, called Reframe the Workplace. And so that's about
has a lot changed in that regard.
The marketplace.
To what degree is this a remix? I ask you just based on what you're shaping.
I think, I like to say, prior to the civil rights movement, the height of it in the 1960s, you had this, you had Jim Crow, And so to get from Jim Crow 40s, 30s, 40s to the 1960s, eventually to integration in the 1970s, you had to go through all that. And so someone has the right to blueprint. I think we wrote the blueprint in terms of how do you accelerate inclusive growth for the marketplace through Reframe the marketplace, the total market approach, right? Now, I was crazy and said, okay, wow, somebody just asked me if we could do the same for the workplace. And so we took a lot of the framework for the marketplace and turned inward. And so if you think about the work in terms of Reframe the marketplace, it's a document that talks about 4 years of validating concept. Somebody says, yes, I'll buy. And then multiple iterations until you optimize until it actually works, right? In terms of the ambition. So we did the same thing. Can you modernize the practice of DE&I? And so spent 4 years, 600 plus interviews, identified the gaps from the original formation of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and voila. In both cases, for the marketplace and workplace, similar to the way multicultural marketing D&I was invented, the origins of similar because it's about the people, not necessarily about the framework of the practice. What's changed, the reason that you needed to modernize multicultural marketing and D&I is because the people have changed. We've gone from 8% of the population in the U.S. specifically to 43, 44% diverse, right? Then the last thing I'll say is the use of technology and globalization. So you need to go beyond race and identity into culture, right? That's what transforms institutions. It's getting to the point of shifting attitudes and behaviors and shifting the culture. And that's what we've been able to prove. So it's been 10 years and we wanted to revisit the marketplace piece. The ink is just drying on the workplace. And so we have Reframe the Workplace coming out next year, 2025, awesome. Marking the 10-year anniversary as a whole. I want the listeners to know in terms of the people that was at the foundation and believed in something that they didn't see.
I was there, folks. I was there.
And we want to thank you for your contribution. And we want to continue to build together as your partner. We appreciate you.
Thank you.